Hey everyone, this is going to be a tabletop build of the X8DT6-F from the latest $375 unRAID build. I'm going to be installing unRAID on it. I'm going to be doing GPU pass-through and a couple other cool things. So I'm going to get this built up, and this video is just going to be about putting the board together, installing some RAM, the CPUs, GPU, which obviously you do that after you put it into a case, but I'm just going to show you the GPU I'm using, and then the heat sinks, and just talk a little bit about the board and just the hardware I'm going to be using, things like that. So I'm going to be putting it in the Rosewell 15 bay case that I used in a previous video. You can find that in the description. I'm going to swap out the X8 SIL that's in there and take that out and put this guy in. So anyway, I'm going to be using, looks like 16, no, these are 4 gig sticks. So I guess I'm going to be using 8 gig of RAM for now. So probably just 2 4 gig sticks. I might fill out these other channels with 1 gig sticks just to get triple channel. But we'll see. It's not super important. I'm going to do this one on a budget. I've already got a nice server set up, and this one's going to be my play around server. I've got dual L5630s, not L5640. These are quad core with hyper threading, and they are clocked. I believe the other ones are, the L5640s are 2.26 base. These are 2.13 base. So they're not as powerful, but they're 1/4 the price. So you can get 40s for about $40 a pair, and these I spent $9.86 shipped up for the pair. So hopefully they use a little bit less power, and honestly for what I'm going to be doing with this, they're going to be plenty, and I wanted to cheap out. I wanted something really cheap, so that's what I went with. Like I said, the motherboard's a Supermicro X8DT6-F, -F meaning it has IPMI, the 6 meaning that it has a built-in LSI 2008 series like SAS card on board. So we're going to be flashing that to IT mode, and I'm probably not going to do it in this video, but I'll do another video where I plug in the video card and we'll do all the BIOS and everything like that, and we'll do a screen capture, so it'll be nice and easy to see. So yeah, you get 2 SAS 2 ports, and we're going to be using breakout cables, so we can go to 8 SATA hard drives with an addition to SATA 2. There's 6 SATA 2 ports there. So this is a really capable board from just right out of the box. The counterpart to this board is the X8DTE, and that's the same board without the SAS controller. But in addition to that, or I guess instead of that, it has a another PCI Express X8 slot here, and you can see that it's kind of there's room for one, and it's kind of built out on the board, but it's not here because that's what the SAS controller is essentially wired to. So you do lose that, but for around the same price as the X8DTE, you get a free integrated LSI 2008. So I think that's awesome, and it's just one less thing you have to worry about. So yeah. So I think first thing we're going to do is install the processors. We're going to clean off these heat sinks and get them mounted. These are the Supermicro 2U 1366 heat sinks. The part number is SNK P0038P, and they don't look like a whole lot, but especially for these L series processors in a rack mount case, they should be plenty. I mean, you can see that there's pretty significant heat pipes in here as well, so they're not just aluminum blocks. In my experience, they're more than adequate even for the X series processors. And you can see they have a copper plate here and an aluminum mounting block. So yeah, let's get these sockets undone and put the processor in, mount the heat sinks, and mount the RAM. I'll talk about the video card a little bit. So yeah. So the first thing you want to do is, we'll start with the left socket here. I leave these covers on, and when you install the processor, the cover will pop off automatically. So I don't like taking them off because you run the risk of damaging your pins, your socket pins doing it that way. So just push down on the lever and move it to the side, lift it up, and if you push down on this part of the socket, you should be able to. Actually, I don't. Okay. So you have to lift the lever up all the way, and then you can lift from here and pull that guy up. So it's gonna be a little bit hard to see on the camera here, but there's two notches on the processors. There's one here, and on the other side there's one here, and that's a good reference point. There's also a golden triangle in only one corner of the processor, and that one's here. And on the socket there's a little bit of a cutout here, and also I'm going to rotate the board a little bit. On the board there's a little white marking, a little white triangle. So that's where that golden triangle lines up. And you can also look at the socket and see that there's two indentions where those notches are on the socket itself. So we're going to drop this guy straight down. Not going to put any pressure. Just carefully drop it down. Make sure it's seated correctly. And it won't move once it's in there. And we just close the lid. And then move the retention arm down. So I guess this socket cover doesn't come off automatically, but just lift it up and it'll pop off. So that's one down, and you can see that the let's see, is this socket 2 or socket 1? Yeah, okay, CPU 2 is on the right, CPU 1's on the left. So CPU 2 is the same thing, it's just flipped the other way. So we're going to do the same thing there. Processor is going to go in the opposite way. That's it. And I got my 91% alcohol. You can use 70% if you want. It's just in a glasses cleaner spray bottle. Now I'm going to spray a little bit on the paper towel, just a little bit on the heat sinks. And that thermal paste will just come right off. So I'd used these heat sinks before, so when I got them initially they had gray thermal paste on it, which is kind of the standard junk you get with any computer part. Or any computer, but I like to use G-Lid GC Extreme. And this stuff, for the money, is pretty much the best you can get. It has a super high thermal, I don't know whether it's a thermal coefficient or just, it's really, really good at transferring heat. So first thing I do when I get a laptop or a desktop, I immediately replace the thermal paste with this. It's great for graphics cards, CPUs, doesn't matter. This stuff is amazing. So that's what I'm going to use here, and I'll show you thermal results and thermal testing in like the board setup video, and just show you how well this stuff works. But anyway, I'm going to use it on both of these, and that's actually what's on here now. But it's been sitting in the garage for a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and clean this stuff off. And I've never had a problem with GC Extreme drying out. So the stuff that's on here is actually probably good, but it's okay. Now I've got plenty of it around, so I'll just replace it. I'm going to apply this both in one shot. Get a little bit closer here. One tube of this goes a really long way. I think it's about $13 a tube, which is more expensive than regular thermal paste for sure. but I've had this one tube for, I don't know, I can't tell you how many builds now. But usually I keep a couple tubes on hand just because I do so many different builds. I'm going to do this one first, and there's no direction. Just going to line up the fins with the flow of air. And typically you want to line up your fins with, you know, the direction of the RAM too, because especially on server builds, the RAM 99% of the time will be in the airflow direction. You'll notice on desktop builds it's not really the case. It's rarely the case. Desktop builds rely a lot less on chassis airflow, and they rely more on the cooling from, like, you know, they have active cooling on the CPU, whether it's a all-in-one water cooler or a tower style heatsink, whereas servers more rely on airflow from the chassis. So it's more important for servers for the airflow to, you know, like there's air channels basically. So I'm just going to screw these in a little bit at a time on each side and sort of do a cross pattern. And these will screw down all the way, and it's not really possible to over tighten them because the threading on the screws stops. You just want to make sure they're down all the way. There we go. Mount this one the same direction. So when you're installing RAM, you want to make sure you install, especially on this board and most Supermicro boards, the blue slots are going to be your primary slots. And in this case, it goes primary, secondary, and so forth. They're also labeled somewhere. Okay, it says processor 2, DIMM 3A, 3B, 2A, 2B, DIMM 1A, 1B. Oh, interesting. So this is actually backwards from the way I thought. So primary slot is closest to the CPU, and then it goes the secondary for the primary slot. So with one stick in each CPU, we're going to do the closest blue slot to the CPU. And I don't think it's super important to get the slot correct as far as whether it's this one or this one or this one, but every board is labeled, so there's no reason to do it the wrong way. And it could prevent you some hassles in the future. So that's what it looks like for single channel. And then what I'm actually gonna do here, I've got these 1 gig sticks that I usually use for testing. But just to flesh this build out a little bit, I'm gonna put them in as well so we get triple channel bandwidth. Oh, and I didn't talk about this, but there's a key on the stick, and there's a short side and a long side. And you can look at the DIMM slot, and there's a short side and a long side. So you just open the tabs, slot it in vertically, and you don't need to worry about closing the tabs. Just push on the top of the stick, and short side first, you'll hear it click, and then long side. And you see they close automatically. That is the correct way to install RAM. And do the same thing on the opposite side. There we go. And so that's it for the RAM. And so I'm just going to do a quick, just talk about the rest of the build. For unRAID, I'm going to be doing GPU pass-through, which is why I picked up one of these from EVGA's B-Stock store. It's a GT1030. It's the GDDR5 model, which means it's the good one. Avoid the DDR4 GT1030. It's about half the speed of the GDDR5 model, and it costs about the same. So make sure you look at the specs and you pick the GDDR5 model. This one's 2 gigabytes. I think I spent $50 on it with free shipping. I bought a couple of these. They're awesome, awesome cards. They're great for home theater PCs. They're fanless, so they make no noise. And they have HDMI 2.0, which means that you get 4K 60 Hertz or 1080p 120 Hertz. I think it'll do 1440p 100 Hertz. But yeah, basically it's the latest HDMI standard, which means that you can enjoy 4K content. I mean, you're not going to play a whole lot of games in 4K 60, but even, you know, maybe some older games like Dark Souls or I don't know, BioShock 1 or something like that, or old Counter-Strike, like really anything old you can play in 4K 60. But it's kind of a neat feature to have, especially if you're just going to use it as like a desktop or a home theater PC. You don't have to downscale to 1080 at 60. You can do 4K at 60. Using a TV as a desktop with 4K 60 is freaking sweet. So anyway, I'm going to use this for GPU pass-through for unRAID. I have a bunch of other cards laying around, so if this one works and I like it, I might swap it for a 1060 or a 1070 or 1080 or my secondary 1080 Ti I have laying around. We'll see. But for now, we're going to use this. Another option, if you just need GPU output, this is an EVGA 8400GS. It has DisplayPort, HDMI 1.4B, I think. It's just, you know, 1080p 60 Hertz, no 4K. It might be able to do 4K at 24 Hertz, but don't bother. And VGA. So if you just need simple display output on a server, and you want a little bit more than the onboard VGA. Sometimes servers don't even have onboard VGA. If it's like a workstation style board, this is enough. And I got this one for $10 with free shipping from the B-Stock store. So you might say, but JDM, there's no X16 PCI Express slots. You're correct. And that doesn't matter because this slot right here has a cutout. So that means that full-size PCI Express cards can slot in. So it's an X8 slot, but X16 cards will fit. And then you're going to tell me, oh, well, aren't you losing a whole lot of performance that way? Actually, no. if you look at benchmarks, even on a 1080 Ti or a 1080, 1070, you're not losing a whole lot of performance. I think at most it's 3%. But if you're using something like a 1030, I can almost guarantee you it's 0%. So don't worry about that so much. Even if you have an electrical X16 slot, it's not going to make a huge difference. And even more interesting, sometimes you have a full physical X16 slot, but it's only wired to X8. So keep that in mind. You might be using an X8 slot anyway, but you don't know it. So that's not going to be a big deal here for this server, but just keep in mind, it's something you got to watch out for. But I think X8 is fine. X4 is really even fine. If you go X1, you're definitely going to lose a lot of performance. So yeah. Oh, another thing to note, this 1030 is dual slot. So that means that it will block the adjacent PCI Express slot. So that's just something to consider. So we'll go down from having 5 slots down to 4, and then 1 being occupied by this. So we'll basically have 3 free PCI Express slots. And unfortunately, the 2 down here are not, they're not open back like this one. And it's not a specification that's listed in the motherboard spec sheet. So you'll just have to look closely at, say you're not buying this motherboard, you're buying another Supermicro board. Just look closely and see if there's a keyed slot like this. I know that some GPU designed, some motherboards that are designed to put a lot of GPUs will have X8 slots and they just have all open backs. I don't know why Supermicro doesn't do that. I guess I get it. Down here, it probably wouldn't be able to fit one because there's some capacitors in the way. But there's 2 slots here of space. I mean, if I could put one here, that'd be perfect because I'm not blocking any additional PCI Express slots. I can still use the 3 up here and then the one below. So that's kind of unfortunate, but honestly, not a big deal. I don't plan on using that many anyway. So anyway, that's what I'm doing GPU wise for this board. And I guess the only other thing I didn't talk about, it has IPMI, which is basically remote KVM and BIOS access. So all of our BIOS settings are going to be pretty much through the IPMI. We might have a few in the regular BIOS, but I believe anything you can change in the regular BIOS, you can also change in the IPMI. We can also do remote power on, remote restart, and then we have 2 dedicated gigabit NICs here. And I might add a 10 gigabit later just to direct connect to the FreeNAS box. We'll see. But this board is pretty awesome. At the time, I got it for 99 bucks free shipping. Now I think it's around 135, 140 bucks. Still an insane deal. And I guess the last thing I have to say, power supply wise, we do need dual EPS connectors, which are 8-pin CPU power. Let me get my camera a little closer here. So we got 2 here, 1 for each CPU, and then our regular ATX 24-pin. So keep that in mind when buying a power supply. You can use an EPS splitter provided there's enough amperage on the 12-volt rail. I don't know offhand what that amperage is. Someone on the Discord knows and talks about it somewhat frequently. So just keep that in mind. But personally, I haven't had any problem running even a 400-watt power supply with an EPS splitter. But again, I think it comes down to the amperage, not the wattage. If you can't tell, I've bought a couple things at the EVGA BE stock store, and one of those things was an 850-watt 80+ bronze power supply. It's got dual EPS, and that was only 30 bucks with free shipping. So sometimes you can just wait for a good deal, and you'll get what you need anyway. You don't need to use a splitter. But yeah, I'll show that in the next video. This should, I guess I'm going to wrap this one up. So yeah, this is the overview of the X8DT6-F, the rest of the hardware I'm using, install, and everything like that. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. In the meantime, join the Discord. Tons of people will help you out there. We play a bunch of games and stuff like that. Check out my Patreon if you like what I do. And Thanks for everyone that supports me already, and I'll see you guys next time.